I'm always amazed by the fact that I don't have a video somewhere on our YouTube channel that gives a simple definition. So that's why I created this series of uh, videos about what is. So, what is 62304? That was one Matthew Walker did. This one's what is 21 CFR 820. Back in November, I recorded a webinar that explained why we need to modernize 21 CFR 820 and adopt ISO 1345 by reference for the quality system regulations in the US instead of continuing to patch and update the current regulations. But I never really explained what is 21 CFR 820. So that's what this video is about. Number one, 21 is the title of the regulations. Title 21 is set aside for FDA regulations. CFR is a three-letter acronym for Code of Federal Regulations, CFR. And then 820 is the part, and they assign sequential numbers, or somewhat sequential, and they leave spaces in between. So whenever they have a new regulation, update, a patch, some new device category gets created, they can slip it in the appropriate section. So there are big blanks. They aren't all filled in, but 820 was set aside for the quality system regulations. And then as they add sections to 820, they add a decimal point and a number. So one is the scope, or dot one is the scope. 820.3 is the definitions. 820.30 is design controls. 820.198 is complaint handling. So every single one of these dots after the 820 is just a subsection of whatever the quality system regulation section should be. So why do we even have these? Well, the FDA needed to come up with some law that made sure medical device companies had adequate procedures, they had trained employees, people that were trained on those procedures, and they were keeping adequate quality system records for all the manufacturing and design that they're performing. So it's all about procedures, training, and records. But they needed to make it a law. If they make it voluntary, as in we'd like you to become ISO 9001 certified, you could or you could not. And they couldn't really mandate, or didn't want to mandate, that companies get a certification like Canada did. So instead, what they did is they said you must comply with these regulations, which they developed in parallel with the development of ISO 1345. In fact, actually, Kim Trout was on the committee that developed ISO 1345 and at the same time worked on the QSR. So when one was published, the other was published shortly thereafter, and it was passed by Congress as a law, and the wording was specific to what the FDA required instead of adopting by reference what the ISO standard had. And that's a very different strategy than what Canada did. They said, let's get involved in the committee just like Kim did. Kim Troutman was involved in the development of the regulation, but instead of us adopting that standard, we chose the regulation route, and Canada said, let's just enforce that they get certified to this standard. So it's a different approach. But all you need to know is that Title 21 is the FDA's regulations, their Code of Federal Regulations. So it's a federal law, and 820 is the part of them that we're talking about, and it's specific to quality system regulations. Now, when was all this developed? Back in 1978. So this stuff is ancient. It was December 18th, I think, of 1978. And then in 1990, they added to it design controls. And in 1996, they had the QSR released. So there were some revisions over time as they developed it. In 1996, it became the quality system regulations, and there have been very little revisions to the regulations since that time. In fact, when I was going to update my webinar training on 21 CFR 820, I went to see what changes there were, and there was one section that had a little change. It was some red lines where they substituted the act for the Food and Drug Act. So they were just modifying some of the words in one section, and that was all they made. So I was like, well, there's no point in me redoing the webinar just for that. But there is a need for modernizing the regulation in general, because It didn't include post-market surveillance. Why? We didn't do post-market surveillance back then. We didn't have a standard for it. The first standard that was created for post-market surveillance of medical devices wasn't until 2020. That's ISO standard 20416. We didn't have risk management. The first risk management standard wasn't until 2000. That was version 1. Version 2 was in 2007. Now we're at version 3 in 2019. So risk management wasn't around then either. They only have one reference to risk in the entire QSR, and they only have 7 references to software. So back then, remember, this is like at the beginning of the internet. So you didn't have wireless devices that talk to your cell phone, and you didn't have electronic medical records from your instrument and in the at point of care for the patient being automatically sending information to the electronic medical records for the hospital. None of that stuff was possible back in the 90s. So we really need to modernize the regulations because there's big gaps in it that don't reflect the changes in technology and the changes in what is expected for the state of the art of controlling the design and manufacture of a medical device. So now that you know what 21 CFR 820 is, you know when it was created, and you know why it needs to be updated to 1345. And if you're interested, we're going to be publishing a blog on Tuesday about modernization of 21 CFR 822 ISO 1345 by reference. And I'll put this video up front at the top of the video, just so those people that didn't get a chance to see the live version can see the recorded version. If you have any other questions, please put them in the comments below. And if you have a suggestion for future blogs or future videos, like what is, let's say, post-market surveillance or something like that, please put it in the comments below. Thank you, everybody, and have a great weekend.